It is past midnight on a dark street in Rome. A man in the middle of the road is straining to lift a heavy iron manhole cover. He's surrounded by a small crowd of desperate people, but nobody steps in to help him. He climbs down the ladder into the underground electrical shafts beneath the city. In the pitch black, illuminated only by a flashlight, he finds an official Italian government seal. This seal was placed there by the police. It is a federal crime to break it. The man doesn't hesitate. He snaps the seal with his bare hands. He grabs the massive breaker switches, pulls them down, and instantly, the massive apartment building next door floods with light.
Who does something like that? A political anarchist? A local vandal? The man climbing out of that sewer, waiting on the pavement for the authorities to arrest him, is a cardinal of the Holy Roman Church, a prince of the Vatican who ranks just one step below the Pope himself. He just deliberately broke the law because 450 people inside that building, including 100 children, had been freezing in the dark for 5 days. When the authorities confronted him, he didn't hide behind diplomatic immunity. He looked them in the eye and said, "If there is a fine, I will pay it. Punish me." You probably picture cardinals sitting in golden rooms, dressed in scarlet silk, entirely removed from the dirt and danger of the real world. But this is Cardinal Konrad Krajewski. Inside the Vatican walls, they whisper a nickname for him: the Pope's Robin Hood. And to understand why the Pope gave him millions of dollars and permission to break the rules, you have to look at exactly how this man was forged.
To understand the rebel, you have to understand the regime that built him. Before the robes, the titles, and the Vatican, Konrad Krajewski was born in 1963 in the gray industrial factory city of Łódź, Poland. He grew up under a strict Soviet-backed communist regime that actively despised religion. In that world, being a faithful Catholic wasn't a social club. It wasn't a way to gain status. It was a massive risk. It could cost you your university spot, your career, your freedom, or your life. The state watched the church, pressured it, and tried to force it to shrink into the shadows.
But a boy growing up in that specific era of Poland learned a lesson that soft, comfortable Christians in the West often never learn. Faith is not a decoration for the good times. It is a fire you are supposed to carry into the cold. Krajewski learned early that real belief requires getting your hands dirty. It requires paying a price. He survived the communist regime, was ordained a priest, and eventually his competence caught the eye of the Vatican. He was called to Rome. Ironically, when Krajewski finally made it to the center of the Catholic world, his first major job was utterly obsessed with rules. For years, he served as a papal master of ceremonies. He was the man standing right next to the Pope, ensuring every candle, every bow, and every gold vestment was flawless. For over a decade, he watched the machinery of the Vatican from the absolute center. He had secured a safe, comfortable, highly respected life. He could have retired in a Roman palace. But in 2013, the rigid machinery of the Vatican shattered.
A new pope took over, and Pope Francis didn't want bureaucrats. He looked at Krajewski, the battle-tested Polish priest who knew how to operate under pressure, and named him the papal almoner. The almoner is the man in charge of the Pope's personal charity accounts. For centuries, this was a quiet, highly dignified desk job. You stamped official parchment, you mailed checks, and you kept your hands clean. But Pope Francis gave Krajewski a ruthless, unprecedented mandate. The Pope told him, "Sell your desk. You don't need it. Don't wait for people to come ringing. You need to get out of the Vatican and go look for the poor." Krajewski took the ancient, dusty office of the almoner and set it on fire.
He stopped mailing checks and started walking the streets at 2 a.m. He needed funding, and he didn't care where it came from. When the executives at Lamborghini built a custom, one-of-a-kind sports car and gifted it to the Pope, the traditional Vatican move would be to put it in a museum. Krajewski didn't put it in a museum. He immediately sent it to Sotheby's, auctioned it off for over $800,000, and pumped the cold, hard cash directly into rebuilding homes in war-torn Iraq. When he saw that the homeless sleeping outside the Vatican walls had nowhere to wash, he didn't write a letter to the mayor of Rome. He brought in contractors. He took Vatican funds and built a free barbershop, a medical clinic, and hot public showers directly inside the pristine, heavily touristed colonnades of St. Peter's Square. Wealthy traditionalists and Roman politicians were horrified. They complained it ruined the aesthetic of the holy site. Krajewski's response? He ignored them and bought sleeping bags. And that brings us back to the manhole. May 2019, the moment that solidified his legend. The building Krajewski restored power to wasn't a charity. It was a squatted, abandoned government building. The 450 people inside had no legal right to be there, but they had nowhere else to go. The Italian power company, following the letter of the law, cut their electricity. For 5 days, babies were drinking cold formula. Elderly people couldn't refrigerate their medicine. The government refused to negotiate. So the Pope's fixer walked up to the building, bypassed the security, and climbed into the sewer. When the media found out that a high-ranking Vatican cardinal had committed a federal crime to turn the lights back on, the Italian government demanded answers. The right-wing politicians called for his arrest. And the Vatican? The Pope didn't say a word. He didn't issue an apology because Krajewski was doing exactly what the man in white hired him to do.
If you think handing out blankets and dodging the Italian police is intense, look at what happened in 2022. When the war exploded across Ukraine, the Pope needed a proxy. He needed someone to prove the church wasn't just watching the suffering from a safe palace in Rome. He sent his almoner. Pushing 60 years old, Krajewski didn't hire a courier to deliver aid. He personally got behind the wheel of an ambulance filled with life-saving generators and medical supplies, and he drove it thousands of miles directly to the front lines. He drove through air raid sirens. He navigated past cratered roads and military checkpoints. And on one specific supply run near the city of Zaporizhia, delivering food to civilians trapped in the crossfire, the Pope's Robin Hood was ambushed. A prince of the Catholic Church was pinned down by incoming artillery and small arms fire. He had to abandon his vehicle and dive face first into the dirt to survive the bombardment. He didn't panic. He didn't demand to be evacuated back to the luxury of Rome. He stayed. He crawled through the dirt, survived the ambush, and finished delivering the supplies. He risked his life because he fundamentally believes that a leader doesn't watch suffering from a screen. They stand in the middle of it. Pope Leo named him the Archbishop of Łódź, the man who managed the Pope's millions, who survived artillery fire in Ukraine and the sewers of Rome, was sent back to the exact same gray, working-class factory streets where he was born 60 years prior. It wasn't a demotion, it was a poetic masterpiece. The ultimate circle, perfectly closed. The rebel wasn't allowed to retire in a Roman penthouse. He was sent back to the trenches to finally be the father and the shepherd to his own people. Pope Leo named him the Archbishop of Łódź, the man who managed the Pope's millions, who survived artillery fire in Ukraine and the sewers of Rome, was sent back to the exact same gray, working-class factory streets where he was born 60 years prior. It wasn't a demotion, it was a poetic masterpiece. The ultimate circle, perfectly closed. The rebel wasn't allowed to retire in a Roman penthouse. he was sent back to the trenches to finally be the father and the shepherd to his own people.
The Vatican isn't just made of marble statues, dusty rules, and guys whispering in ears. It is a global machine run by human beings, operating in the shadows, executing missions you never see on the nightly news. If you want to uncover more of the secret power players inside the church, you need to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the next deep dive. And I want to hear from you down in the comments. If you were standing on that dark street in Rome, knowing it would cause an international incident, would you have risked federal arrest to break that seal? Let me know your thoughts. Drop a like on the video if you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.